They disappear without warning. One day, they're fully present in your life, laughing with you, sharing moments, seeming perfectly fine. Then suddenly, they vanish. Not in a dramatic way, not with slammed doors or angry words. They just fade. Their texts become shorter. Their calls become rarer. Their presence becomes a memory. And when you finally reach out to ask what happened, you're met with silence. Or worse, a casual, "I'm just busy," that feels like a wall built overnight. This isn't rudeness. This isn't cruelty. This is survival. Right now, millions of people around the world are doing something that others cannot understand. They are pulling away from everyone they know, from friends who care, from family who loves them, from partners who've done nothing wrong. They are creating distance not because they want to hurt anyone, but because staying close feels like drowning. It's called emotional withdrawal, and it's one of the most misunderstood patterns in human psychology. To those on the outside, it looks like abandonment, like ingratitude, like someone who just doesn't care anymore. But look closer. Behind the silence, there is rarely a story of apathy. Instead, there is a profound psychology of self-preservation. Why do people actually do it? Or perhaps, is emotional withdrawal a choice? Or is it an unconscious mechanism triggered by pain the world cannot see? In this exploration, we're diving deep into the psychology of people who distance themselves from everyone. We will uncover the invisible wounds that make connection feel dangerous. We will explore the attachment patterns that turn closeness into a threat. And we will understand why, for some people, disappearing is not an act of rejection, but an act of protection. If you've ever pulled away from everyone you love, or if someone you care about has vanished from your life, this is the explanation you've been searching for. This is the truth behind the silence. Let's begin. Emotional withdrawal almost never begins with a dramatic decision. It begins with accumulation, slow, quiet, almost invisible to everyone except the person living through it. For months, even years, the pattern looks manageable from the outside. They show up to gatherings. They respond to messages. They maintain the appearance of normalcy. But inside, something is eroding. Not breaking, eroding. Like a coastline being worn away by waves so gradually that no single wave seems responsible for the damage. People distance themselves to avoid reliving painful memories or feelings, often as a response to overwhelming stress. But this isn't about a single painful memory. This is about a nervous system that has learned, through repeated experience, that connection equals danger, that vulnerability equals pain, that letting people in means giving them the power to destroy you. Think of it like this. Imagine you touch a hot stove once. You learn. You pull your hand back instinctively next time. Now imagine the stove isn't always hot. Sometimes it's warm and comforting. Sometimes it burns. You never know which version you'll get. Eventually, your brain makes a decision. Staying away from the stove entirely is safer than risking another burn. This is what happens with emotional withdrawal. The person isn't avoiding connection because they don't want it. They're avoiding it because their nervous system has categorized closeness as unpredictable danger. Emotional detachment can be helpful if used purposefully, such as by setting boundaries. But it becomes harmful when you can't control it. And that's the critical distinction. Healthy boundaries are conscious. Emotional withdrawal is unconscious. It happens before the person even realizes they're doing it. Someone gets too close, asks too many questions, wants too much vulnerability. And suddenly, the walls go up, not as a decision, as a reflex. The person who withdraws doesn't wake up one morning and think, "Today I will push everyone away." They wake up feeling suffocated by expectations they can't meet, overwhelmed by emotions they can't regulate, terrified of disappointing people who care. So they pull back, just a little, just enough to breathe. But that little bit of distance creates confusion in others. That confusion leads to pursuit. That pursuit feels like pressure. And pressure is exactly what triggered the withdrawal in the first place. It becomes a cycle. The more people reach out, the further the person retreats. The further they retreat, the more abandoned others feel. The more abandoned others feel, the harder they try to reconnect. And the harder they try, the more unsafe the withdrawing person feels. Until eventually, the only solution that makes sense to their nervous system is complete disappearance. Not because they don't care, because caring has become unbearable. The roots beneath the pattern. To understand emotional withdrawal, we have to understand where it begins. And it begins long before the person ever pulls away from anyone. It begins in childhood, in the moments when a child reached for comfort and found emptiness, when they cried and were told to stop being dramatic, when they shared their feelings and were met with dismissal or worse, punishment. Emotional detachment often arises due to adverse childhood experiences, such as physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, developing as a maladaptive coping mechanism for trauma. But trauma doesn't always look like the extreme cases we imagine. Trauma can be subtle. It can be a parent who was physically present but emotionally absent, a caregiver who provided food and shelter but never asked how you felt, a family where emotions were inconvenient, where crying was weak, where needing people was shameful. These children learn a devastating lesson. I am alone in my pain. No one will come. No one can be trusted with what's inside me. So they stop reaching, they stop asking, they stop expecting, and they build an identity around self-reliance that looks like strength but feels like imprisonment. By the time they reach adulthood, the pattern is so deeply ingrained that they don't even recognize it as a pattern. They just think, this is who I am. I don't need people. But that's not accurate. They do need people. About 25% of the population has an avoidant attachment style, characterized by self-reliance and emotional withdrawal, having learned in childhood that they cannot rely on others for emotional support. These individuals become what attachment researchers call dismissive avoidant. They learn that emotions threaten safety, that vulnerability leads to rejection, that the only person they can truly depend on is themselves. Here's what makes this heartbreaking. The child who learned not to need anyone grows into an adult who desperately wants connection but has no idea how to trust it. They want to be close. They want to feel safe with someone. But every instinct they've developed tells them that closeness is dangerous, that letting someone in is the same as handing them a weapon. So they create distance before they can get hurt. They leave before they can be left. They disconnect before they can be disappointed. This isn't conscious manipulation. This is a nervous system operating on outdated software. Software written in childhood that says, people will hurt you, so protect yourself by needing no one. The triggers that activate withdrawal, emotional withdrawal, doesn't happen randomly. It happens in response to specific triggers. And these triggers often seem innocent to the person on the receiving end. A text that says, we need to talk. A question that asks, what's wrong? A moment of vulnerability that requires the person to admit they're struggling. These aren't threats, but to someone with an avoidant attachment system, they feel like threats. Why? Because each of these moments requires something terrifying, emotional exposure. Vulnerability activates internal alarms in avoidant individuals, often rooted in early attachment wounds where a connection led to shame, rejection, or loss of autonomy. When someone with dismissive avoidant patterns feels emotionally exposed, their brain doesn't register it as intimacy. It registers it as danger. Their heart rate increases. Their breath becomes shallow. Their mind starts racing for exits. Conflict is a massive trigger, not because they're afraid of disagreement, but because conflict requires them to engage emotionally when they feel most unsafe. Research shows avoidant individuals use withdrawal strategies during conflict rather than active engagement, and this withdrawal often triggers demand or aggression strategies from partners. The avoidant person pulls back. Their partner feels abandoned and pursues harder. The pursuit feels like an attack. The person withdraws further. It's a dance where both people are terrified, but neither can stop moving. Demands for immediate emotional availability are another trigger. When someone says, I need you right now, or why won't you just talk to me? The avoidant person's system interprets this as, you are not enough as you are. You must perform emotions you cannot access on demand. You must be vulnerable when vulnerability feels like being skinned alive. So they shut down, not to punish the other person, to survive the moment. Even positive intimacy can be triggering. Someone expressing love, someone wanting to move the relationship forward, someone showing that they're becoming attached. All of these signal to the avoidant person that the stakes are rising, that the relationship is getting too deep, that they're about to disappoint someone who cares. And rather than risk that inevitable disappointment, they create distance. They pull back emotionally even while physically present. They find reasons why the relationship won't work. They manufacture problems where none existed. Because here's the truth that makes avoidant withdrawal so painful for everyone involved. The avoidant person isn't running from you. They're running from the terror that they will fail you, that you will eventually see they're not enough, that the moment you truly know them, you will leave. So they leave first. Not because they want to, because leaving feels safer than being left. The hidden landscape of shame. Beneath every act of emotional withdrawal lies something most people never see. Shame. Deep, pervasive shame that whispers, "You are too much and not enough" at the same time. This shame doesn't come from one moment. It comes from thousands of micro-rejections that taught the person their emotions were inconvenient. Their needs were burdensome. Their very existence required apology. When someone with this history begins to pull away, they're not just avoiding connection. They're avoiding the feeling of being exposed as fundamentally unlovable. Every time someone tries to get close, that shame resurfaces. "If you really knew me, you wouldn't want to stay." This belief doesn't feel like a belief. It feels like a fact. An unchangeable truth about who they are. So withdrawal becomes protection. If I disappear before you can reject me, I maintain control. If I need no one, I can't be disappointed when no one shows up. If I keep everyone at arm's length, I never have to face the moment when they inevitably leave. This logic is airtight to the person living it. It makes perfect sense. It's the only way they know how to survive emotional intimacy without being destroyed by it. Studies show couples who avoid conflict through distance often go months or years connecting only around logistics. Using withdrawal to avoid confrontations they learned in childhood were frightening. These people aren't choosing disconnection because they prefer it. They're choosing it because every alternative they've experienced led to pain. Connection meant disappointment. Vulnerability meant shame. Opening up meant being told they were too sensitive, too needy, too broken. The shame also manifests in how they interpret other people's behavior. When someone reaches out with care, the avoidant person doesn't think they care about me. They think, what do they want from me that I can't give? When someone expresses concern, they don't hear love. They hear judgment. You're not handling your life well enough. You're failing at being a functional human. Every act of kindness becomes evidence of their inadequacy. Every gesture of love becomes a reminder that they don't know how to receive it. This creates an impossible situation. The person desperately wants to feel safe with someone. But safety requires vulnerability. Vulnerability triggers shame. Shame demands withdrawal. And withdrawal prevents the very safety they're seeking. They're trapped in a cycle where the solution to their pain, genuine connection, is the thing their entire system is designed to avoid. There comes a moment in many withdrawing people's lives when the pattern reaches a breaking point. Not a dramatic explosion, a quiet collapse. They've been managing, balancing the pressure to connect with the terror of connection, showing up just enough to avoid concern while maintaining enough distance to feel safe. But systems under constant stress eventually fail, and when they do, the withdrawal becomes total. Emotional withdrawal can also manifest as collapse, a deep-in-your-bones physical and emotional exhaustion, seen in caregivers, emergency workers, or those in high-demand situations. But you don't have to be in a high-stress job to experience this collapse. You can experience it simply from the exhaustion of pretending to be okay, of managing everyone else's expectations while your own needs remain unmet and unacknowledged. This is when the person stops responding to texts entirely, stops showing up to plans, stops maintaining the facade of availability. Not because they've decided to hurt anyone, because they have nothing left. The tank is empty. The walls that were supposed to protect them have become a prison, and they can't see a way out that doesn't involve staying hidden. People on the outside often interpret this collapse as the withdrawing person being selfish, uncaring, self-absorbed. But if you could see inside their experience, you'd see something different. You'd see someone drowning in self-criticism. I'm letting everyone down. I'm a terrible friend. I'm failing at being human. They're not pulling away because they don't care. They're pulling away because they care so much that the weight of potentially disappointing people is crushing them. The guilt becomes paralyzing. I should reach out. I should explain. I should fix this. But explaining requires emotional availability they don't have. Fixing things requires vulnerability they can't access. So they stay silent. And the silence makes everything worse. The people who care become hurt. The hurt turns to anger. The anger confirms the withdrawing person's worst fear. I knew I would hurt them. This is why I should stay away from everyone. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They withdraw to protect people from their inadequacy. The withdrawal hurts people. The hurt confirms they were right to withdraw. And the cycle continues, deeper and more isolating with each turn. The misunderstood language of distance. Here's what makes emotional withdrawal so complex. It's a form of communication, just not one most people recognize. When someone disappears, they're not saying, "I don't care about you." They're saying, "I care so much that it terrifies me." They're saying, "I don't know how to need you without drowning." They're saying, "The only way I know how to protect both of us is to leave before I fail you." But this language is invisible. All anyone sees is the absence, the silence, the feeling of being abandoned without explanation. And that's where the profound misunderstanding happens. The person who withdrew thinks they're protecting everyone by staying away. The people they left behind feel betrayed, confused, hurt. Both sides are experiencing real pain. Neither side can see the other's perspective clearly. When someone withdraws repeatedly, love and trust dissolve, and the receiver feels abandoned and alone, unable to trust giving their heart to someone who keeps pulling away. This is the devastating cost of withdrawal. It doesn't protect relationships, it erodes them, slowly, inevitably, until nothing remains but the memory of what could have been if the person had been able to stay. But here's what's important to understand. The person who withdraws isn't trying to hurt anyone. They're operating from a nervous system that learned connection equals danger. Their brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Protect them from perceived threats. The tragedy is that the protection mechanism itself creates the outcome they fear most. They withdraw to avoid abandonment, and the withdrawal causes abandonment. They distance to avoid disappointment, and the distance creates disappointment. They're not villains. They're people whose early experiences taught them that emotional survival requires isolation. And now, even when they want desperately to connect, their entire system fights against it. It's like trying to run towards something while your body drags you backward. You want to move forward. You're trying to move forward. But every instinct you have pulls you in the opposite direction. The path that isn't about fixing. If you're someone who distances yourself from everyone, this isn't a prescription for how to change. This is permission to understand yourself. To see that your withdrawal isn't a character flaw. It's a survival strategy developed by a younger version of you who was doing the best they could with the tools they had. You learned to need no one because needing people hurt too much. You learned to disappear because staying visible meant facing shame you couldn't survive. You learned to protect others from your emotions because your emotions were treated as burdens. None of this was your fault. None of this means you're broken beyond repair. It means you adapted to survive. And that adaptation made sense in the context where it developed. But you're not in that context anymore. The people who taught you that vulnerability equals danger aren't in every relationship. The experiences that taught you to hide aren't happening in every connection. Your nervous system is operating on information from the past, treating present relationships like they're guaranteed to replicate old wounds. And they're not. This doesn't mean you can just decide to stop withdrawing. Patterns carved this deep don't dissolve with awareness alone. But awareness is the first step, seeing that withdrawal is protection, not preference. Understanding that your instinct to flee comes from pain, not indifference. Recognizing that the walls you built to keep people out are also keeping you trapped inside. You deserve relationships where vulnerability doesn't equal danger, where needing someone doesn't make you weak, where showing up as you are is enough, but getting there requires something terrifying. Staying present when every instinct screams to run. It requires letting people see you in your messiness, your uncertainty, your fear. Not because you owe them that, because you deserve to experience what happens when you're fully seen and not rejected. And if you're someone who has been left behind by a withdrawing person, this is your understanding. They didn't leave because you weren't enough. They left because being close to anyone feels like suffocation. Their silence wasn't about you. It was about the war happening inside them, between the desperate need for connection and the terror that connection will destroy them. This doesn't erase your hurt. You're allowed to feel abandoned. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to grieve the relationship that ended without closure. But you can hold your pain and also hold this truth. Their withdrawal was never a statement about your worth. It was a statement about their capacity in that moment. And that capacity was shaped by experiences that had nothing to do with you. The quiet revolution emotional withdrawal isn't a life sentence. It's a pattern. And patterns, with time and intention and support, can shift. Not quickly, not easily. But they can shift. The person who learned that isolation equals safety can learn that connection can be safe too. The person who learned to need no one can learn that needing people doesn't equal weakness. The person who disappeared can learn that staying visible doesn't mean being destroyed. But this shift doesn't happen through force. Doesn't happen through someone convincing them to just open up. It happens through small, repeated experiences that challenge what their nervous system believes to be true. It happens through relationships where vulnerability doesn't lead to rejection, where showing up imperfectly is met with acceptance, where needing someone doesn't result in abandonment. Emotional withdrawal serves as a defense mechanism to shield from perceived threats, but addressing it requires creating safe spaces to explore feelings without need for psychological distancing. This is the work of therapy, of patient friends, of partners who understand that building trust with someone who learned not to trust takes time. It's showing up consistently, not demanding immediate vulnerability, not taking the withdrawal personally. Just being steady, being safe, being present without pressure. For the person who withdraws, the work is learning to notice the moment the instinct to flee arises, not to fight it, just to notice it. To say, my system is telling me this is dangerous, but is it actually dangerous right now? Or is this a false alarm based on past experience? That pause between trigger and response is where change lives. In that pause, they can choose. Not always, not perfectly, but sometimes. And sometimes is how patterns begin to shift. This isn't about becoming someone who never needs space. Healthy relationships include space. It's about the difference between chosen space and terrified fleeing. Between I need some time alone to recharge and I have to disappear because closeness feels like drowning. One is boundary, the other is survival mode. The revolution happens quietly, in the moments when someone with avoidant patterns chooses to stay in a difficult conversation instead of shutting down. In the text they send saying, I'm struggling, instead of vanishing. In the vulnerability they risk, despite every instinct telling them not to. These moments don't feel revolutionary. They feel terrifying. But they're the foundation of a different kind of relationship. One where connection doesn't equal danger, where being known doesn't equal being destroyed. The truth we're learning. People who distance themselves from everyone aren't cold. They aren't selfish. They aren't incapable of love. They're people whose nervous systems learned that love is dangerous. That vulnerability leads to pain. That the only way to survive emotional intimacy is to avoid it entirely. This learning happened through real experiences, through real pain, through a childhood that taught them, again and again, that needing people only leads to disappointment. They carry this learning into every relationship, not as a choice, as a reflex, and until they can build new experiences that teach their nervous system something different, that connection can be safe, that vulnerability doesn't always equal rejection, that showing up imperfectly can still be enough, the pattern will continue. They will keep withdrawing, keep disappearing, keep protecting themselves from an imagined danger that feels absolutely real. If this is your pattern, know this. Your withdrawal makes sense. It's not evidence that you're broken. It's evidence that you're human, that you adapted to survive. And adaptation is strength, even when the adaptation itself has become limiting. You're not required to force yourself into vulnerability that feels unsafe. You're not required to override your protective instincts because someone else doesn't understand them. But you also deserve to know that the walls protecting you are also isolating you, that the distance keeping others out is also keeping you trapped, and that there are people therapists, friends, partners, who who understand that building safety takes time, who won't demand you dismantle your walls overnight, who will simply sit with you on your side of the wall until, maybe, you feel safe enough to open a door. And if you've loved someone who distances themselves, know this: their withdrawal wasn't rejection, it was protection, not of themselves from you, but of both of you from what they feared they would do. They didn't leave because you failed them. They left because they were terrified of failing you. Their silence wasn't cruelty. It was the only language their nervous system knew how to speak when overwhelmed. You didn't deserve to be left without explanation. You didn't deserve the confusion and hurt, and they didn't deserve to live in a nervous system that treats love like danger. Everyone in this story is hurting. Everyone is doing their best with the tools they have, and everyone deserves compassion. Including you. Including them. Including the younger versions of both of you who learned patterns that made sense at the time, but no longer serve the life you're trying to build. The people who distance themselves from everyone are not running from love. They're running from the terror that love will confirm their deepest fear, that they are, at their core, unlovable. And they're wrong. They were always wrong. But knowing you're wrong doesn't change what the body believes, doesn't rewrite the code written in childhood, doesn't make vulnerability feel safe when your entire history taught you it isn't. This is the truth behind the silence. Not apathy, not cruelty, not indifference, just fear. The most human fear there is, that if you let someone truly see you, they will leave. So you leave first. You protect yourself the only way you know how. By becoming unreachable, untouchable, alone. But alone was never the goal. Safety was. And somewhere, beneath all the walls and distance and protective silence, lives the part that still hopes, that still wants to be known, that still believes, despite everything, that maybe connection doesn't have to hurt, that maybe being seen doesn't have to equal being destroyed, that maybe, with the right people and enough time and patience, love can feel safe instead of terrifying. That hope is what makes the distance so painful. Because it means they haven't given up. They're just lost, waiting for proof that vulnerability won't destroy them, looking for evidence that staying is safer than running, hoping for a relationship that teaches their body what their mind cannot yet believe, that they are enough, exactly as they are, walls and all.